The subway station was darker than Elena expected for Brooklyn. She stood at the entrance of the abandoned platform, close enough to hear, but far enough to pretend she hadn't. 3 days of double shifts, and this was the first time she had taken the shortcut home. Her hands trembled inside the pockets of her scrubs. November rain soaked through the thin fabric, but she barely felt it. All her attention focused on the small figure huddled beneath the rusted awning. A child, no older than 6. The girl looked smaller than any child should look alone at 2 a.m. Dark curls matted against pale skin, bare feet tucked beneath a nightgown too thin for the weather. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs while the city slept indifferent around them. Elena pressed her back against the cold concrete pillar, her chest tightening as the girl lifted her head. Blue eyes, terrified, old in a way that children's eyes should never be. She was supposed to keep walking, should have called the police and disappeared into the night, like any sensible person would. But sensible people hadn't lost what Elena had lost. Sensible people didn't carry empty nurseries in their hearts and phantom kicks in their memories. The girl flinched when Elena stepped closer. "Don't take me back to them," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please. Mommy said I have to die so Daddy will be sad." Elena froze. The words hung in the air like gunshots. She had heard desperate things before. Working night shifts in Brooklyn's emergency rooms taught her that darkness wore many faces. But this was different. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Elena crouched down slowly, the way she might approach a wounded animal. The girl studied her for a long moment. Then, something in those blue eyes shifted. Trust, fragile and desperate. "Sophia," she breathed. "Sophia Vale." The name meant nothing to Elena. Not yet. She didn't know that somewhere in Manhattan, a man with blood on his hands and grief in his bones had been searching for this child for 6 months. She didn't know that Dominic Vale had buried an empty grave for his daughter 3 weeks ago, because hope had finally run out. She didn't know that by picking up this broken girl and carrying her home, she was walking into a world where love and violence shared the same bed, where monsters wept over photographs and angels pulled triggers without blinking. All Elena knew was that the child was cold, and that she had learned, years ago in a different life with a different monster, what it meant when no one came to save you. So she took off her jacket, wrapped it around Sophia's trembling shoulders, and made a decision that would change everything. "I'm not taking you back to anyone," Elena said quietly. "Not tonight. Not ever." Sophia's small fingers closed around her wrist like a lifeline. And somewhere across the river, in a penthouse that felt more like a mausoleum, Dominic Vale stared at his daughter's photograph and whispered her name into the darkness for the 183rd night in a row. He didn't know she was alive. He didn't know she was safe. He didn't know that a stranger with sad eyes and gentle hands had just become the only thing standing between his daughter and the grave her mother had been digging. But he would. Soon enough, he would. If you are listening to this and feel that the story touches something quiet and unspoken inside you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, to like and share this video so we can continue bringing heartfelt stories every single day. And if it is not too much to ask, tell me where you are watching from and leave a comment below, so we know which corner of the world this story has reached, because we treasure every word you share with us. Elena's apartment was on the 4th floor of an old building in Brooklyn, where the elevator only worked on fair weather days, and the hallway always carried the smell of dampness and mildew, and she carried Sophia up each step, feeling the small body trembling in her arms, the child lighter than she had imagined, lighter than any 6-year-old should ever be. And when Elena opened the door, the apartment greeted them with its familiar silence. A small living room flowing into the kitchen, a bedroom just big enough for a single bed, a bathroom with a faucet that liked to drip through the night. Everything clean and simple and empty in the way only a place inhabited by one person for far too long can be, with a single cup on the kitchen shelf, a single pair of slippers by the door, a single sofa no one sat on facing the empty space across from it, and Elena set Sophia down and switched on the light, the weak yellow glow pushing back the darkness but not the cold in the blue eyes watching her. The child standing in the middle of the room, like a small animal that had wandered into foreign territory, arms wrapped tight around herself, bare feet curling against the wooden floor, and Elena saw that the girl was surveying everything: the front door, the window, the possible exits, the way no ordinary child ever looked at a room, the way Elena herself used to look at her ex-husband's house whenever he came home drunk. And she said nothing as she walked quietly into the bathroom and turned on the hot water, steam rising to fog the old mirror, before she went back to the living room and saw Sophia still, in the exact same spot, as if afraid that if she moved even a little everything might disappear. So Elena knelt until her eyes were level with the child's, and she did not touch Sophia, only held out her hand, palm up, an invitation without pressure. And Sophia stared at that hand for a very long time before, slowly, those small fingers came to rest in her palm, icy and shaking but trusting. And Elena led the girl into the bathroom and gently peeled off the thin, soaked pajama set. And that was when she saw them. The bruises on Sophia's arms, not new, already fading into yellow and green. The marks of days, maybe weeks. The clear impressions of fingers where someone had gripped this child too hard and too often. And Elena felt nausea claw its way up her throat as memories rushed in without warning. Daniel's hand closing around her neck and slamming her into the wall. The smell of whiskey on his breath. His voice hissing through clenched teeth. The memory of not being able to breathe. Of knowing no one was coming, no one would save her, and she blinked and dragged herself back to the present where Sophia was watching her, those wise blue eyes seeming to read her thoughts. And they said nothing because they did not need to. There are wounds that do not require language to be understood, so Elena helped Sophia into the tub and poured warm water over the child's dark curls, washing her hair with her own lavender-scented shampoo, while Sophia closed her eyes and, for the first time since they had met, those small shoulders lost their rigid tension. And after the bath, Elena dressed her in an old sweater of her own, far too large, hanging past the girl's knees but warm, and Sophia touched the soft yarn, fingertips tracing each knitted line as if it were the most precious thing she had ever been allowed to touch. And Elena made a cup of hot milk, but Sophia only drank a few sips before stopping, her stomach tightening after too many hungry hours to handle more. A clear sign of malnutrition that Elena had seen in the hospital in children who had been abandoned and forgotten. But seeing it now in Sophia, in a child wearing expensive pajamas with a father that Google called a billionaire, made her understand that money never protects anyone from real monsters. And the night had grown late by the time Elena led Sophia into the bedroom, settled her on the bed, and pulled the blanket up to her chin, intending to stand and go to sleep on the sofa, when a small hand clutched at her sleeve. Sophia curling up on the mattress with those tiny fingers gripping the fabric of Elena's shirt as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling into an endless pit. "And do not go," the girl whispered, her voice hoarse from too much crying and too little speaking. "Please." And Elena sat back down on the edge of the bed, her hand gently smoothing the damp curls on Sophia's forehead, as she said in a voice as soft as breath, that she was not going anywhere, and it was the first promise she had made in years, that she truly intended to keep. And in the morning light filtering through the thin curtains, Elena woke from a restless doze, her back pressed against the headboard where she had sat all night, too afraid to move because the small hand had kept its grip on her even in sleep. Sophia curled beside her, dark curls spread over the pillow, her face peaceful for the first time since they had met, and Elena carefully freed her sleeve from those fingers and went to the kitchen where she opened the refrigerator to its familiar emptiness. A few eggs, some bread, butter, and milk. Enough for one person to get through the day, but not enough to feed a child who needed to recover. So she fried eggs, toasted the bread, poured a small glass of milk, and when she returned to the bedroom, Sophia was awake, sitting hunched in the corner of the bed, blue eyes scanning the room as if searching for danger, softening only when they found Elena. And though she did not smile, her shoulders dropped, and the tension in her body loosened a little, and they sat together at the tiny kitchen table while Sophia ate slowly, each bite small and cautious like a stomach that had forgotten how to accept food. And Elena did not urge her on, only sat across from her, drinking cold coffee and waiting, understanding that stories like this could not be forced, that they required time and safety and trust, until finally Sophia spoke, her voice so small that Elena had to lean forward to catch the words, saying that her mother had picked her up from school 6 months ago, that her mother had said they were going on an outing, and she had been happy because her mother rarely came to pick her up. And Sophia paused, fingers worrying at the edge of her toast, while Elena kept her silence and waited. And then the girl said her mother had not taken her home, that she had driven for a long time, and Sophia had fallen asleep and woken up in an apartment she did not know in East New York, where her mother said this was their new home. Sophia lifted her gaze to Elena with eyes too old for her years as she added that there was a man there named Marcus, that her mother said he was a friend but he did not feel like a friend, that he shouted often and sometimes hit her mother and she was afraid of him. Elena felt anger blaze inside her, hot and sharp as a blade, but she swallowed it down and kept her face calm because Sophia needed steadiness, not another adult losing control. "And what about your mother?" Elena asked softly, and Sophia said that her mother changed, that at first she still played with her but soon she started going out, gone all day and sometimes all week, leaving Sophia alone with Marcus, who did not let her eat much and called her a nuisance. Elena closed her eyes for a heartbeat, fighting down the nausea, and when she opened them again, Sophia was watching her, weighing whether Elena could be trusted, and Elena asked why she had run away, and in a whisper Sophia said that one night she had heard Marcus talking on the phone, saying they should kill the girl, take the money, and disappear, and those words hung in the stale kitchen air, while Elena forgot how to breathe for a few seconds, realizing that a 6-year-old child had overheard someone planning her murder and had then been forced to save herself, and Sophia went on in a flat voice, as if she were speaking about someone else, saying she had climbed out the window, that the apartment was on the first floor so she could jump, that she had run without knowing how long or where she was, only that she did not want to die, and then she stopped, and for the first time, Elena saw her truly look like a child, eyes brimming, mouth trembling, as she said she missed her father, that he had always read to her before bed, that he told her she was his princess and he would protect her, but he had not come, and she asked why he had not come, and Elena laid her hand over the small cold one on the table, feeling those fingers like ice, as she asked gently what her father's name was, and Sophia answered with a voice full of longing and hurt that his name was Dominic Vale, and the name echoed in Elena's mind as she reached for her phone and typed it into Google with shaking fingers, and the first result made her blood run cold. Vale Industries chief executive officer, suspected of ties to organized crime, and that same night across the river and a whole world away in Manhattan, Dominic Vale sat in the darkness of the penthouse crowning the city, the glass walls rising from floor to ceiling, where the city outside glittered like a blanket of diamonds stretching to the horizon, while inside the silence was thick as water, and Dominic sank into it like a drowning man, in a home that had once appeared in an architecture magazine, $200 million worth of Italian marble and oak from primeval forests and art that museums would kill to possess. But for Dominic, it had become nothing more than a beautiful box containing emptiness, no laughter, no small feet pattering over the floors, no clear voice calling daddy whenever he came home. And for 6 months, 183 days, 4,392 hours, he had counted every second since Victoria vanished with Sophia, never sleeping enough because each time he closed his eyes he saw his daughter, and each time he woke, he had to face the truth of her empty bed, and he rose from his chair and walked down the dark hallway to the door of her room, and pushed it open without turning on the light, the glow of the city enough to show him the princess bed with its pink canopy, the shelves crammed with fairy tales, the ballerina dress hanging on its hook awaiting a performance that would never happen, and on the pillow the stuffed bear named Mr. Buttons, Sophia's closest friend and faithful bedtime companion, the one she never slept without until the day Victoria took her away without allowing her to bring anything at all, and Dominic sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the bear, pressing it to his face even though her scent had long since faded, searching for any trace of his child, and memory came without invitation, Sophia at 5 racing toward him as he stepped through the door after a long day, calling "Daddy, you are home," her little legs stumbling over the rug, dark curls flying with each step, her smile so bright that he forgot every brutal meeting and ruthless decision, lifting her into his arms and spinning her as she laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck, whispering that he had missed her and that she was his princess, and she pressing a wet kiss to his cheek and asking if he would read to her that night because he had promised, and he had always kept that promise. No matter if he came home at midnight or straight from a bloody negotiation, he always sat by her bed and read stories of princes and princesses until she slept, and now he sat on the empty bed and read to the air, until his phone vibrated and pulled him back, and the name Frank Russo lit the screen, his right hand who had stood beside him for 15 years through blood and fire and the darkest nights. And Dominic answered with a voice rough from too little sleep, saying, "Talk to me." And Frank said, "Boss, we have news, that one of Marcus's men had just been arrested in Atlantic City and was talking." And Dominic was already on his feet before Frank finished, and 30 minutes later he stood in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, where the smell of rust and damp mixed with the stench of fear, and Marcus's man was tied to a chair, face swollen, blood trailing from nose to chin, and Dominic cared nothing for his condition, only for what he knew. And he said in a voice cold as steel, "Tell me about my daughter." And the man talked. Of course he talked, because everyone talked when faced with Dominic Vale in a room like this. And he said that Marcus and Victoria were in an old building on the edge of Brooklyn, that they had moved several times but had been there for the past 2 months, and Dominic asked about the girl, his heart pounding like a fist against his ribs, and the man swallowed, blood sliding down his throat as he said that, as of last week, the girl was still alive, and he swore he knew nothing more. And Dominic closed his eyes, thinking of the 6 months he had spent believing his daughter might already be dead, 6 months of slowly burying hope until 3 weeks earlier. He had built an empty grave for Sophia because he could no longer bear to hope. And now there was a sliver of light, and he said, "Find her," his voice no longer sounding entirely human, saying he did not care what it cost. He did not care who had to die. "Find my daughter." And Frank nodded, and in 15 years of serving Dominic, he had never once seen this man cry until this night. Dominic did not sleep that night, and he did not sleep much in the nights that followed, because the moment he walked out of that warehouse, he began to marshal every resource his empire could reach: private investigators and hackers, and people who could tap into security camera systems across 3 states, people who could make the police look the other way or look much closer depending on what was needed. And money was not a problem, had never been a problem. Yet for the first time in his life, Dominic understood that money could not buy the one thing he needed most. And at first light the next morning, his team stormed the apartment in Brooklyn, Dominic going with them despite Frank urging him to stay back, because he needed to see with his own eyes. He needed to know. And the place was on the first floor of an old building with peeling paint and a hallway that reeked of stale cigarettes. This the place where Victoria had hidden his daughter for 6 months. This the place where his princess had lived while he sat in his lavish penthouse convinced she was dead, and they broke the door and rushed inside to find the apartment empty. No Victoria, no Marcus, no Sophia, only the debris of a hurried departure, clothes scattered across the floor, a refrigerator with expired food, a handbag abandoned in the middle of the living room with Victoria's lipstick and wallet still inside, proof that they had run so fast they left almost everything behind. And Dominic walked through each room searching for any trace of his child until he found it at the end of the hallway in a small room, a pillow on the floor with no bed, a thin blanket rolled into a corner, and on the windowsill a cheap plastic doll, the kind of doll Sophia would never have had at home because she only loved stuffed bears. But this was the only thing someone had given her here, and Dominic picked up the doll, his fingers tightening until the plastic creaked. Then he saw the window, open wide, the curtain stirring in the wind. And on the sill, in a fine layer of dust, were footprints, small bare footprints the size of a 6-year-old child, and he stood there staring at them, while the picture slowly formed in his mind. Sophia hearing something, Sophia afraid, Sophia saving herself by climbing out that window and running into the night all alone. 6 years old, no shoes, no coat, no one to stand between her and the world. His daughter out there somewhere by herself, and he did not know where. So Dominic ordered the search widened to every hospital within 100 miles, every police station, every shelter for the homeless, every security camera on every street, in every store, at every gas station, his hackers working day and night, combing through millions of gigabytes of data, searching for the image of a little girl with dark curls and blue eyes, his people plastering flyers across New Jersey and New York, promising a fortune for any information, but nothing came, not a single trace, as if Sophia had dissolved into thin air. And on the second day after the raid, Dominic stood before the glass wall of his penthouse, watching Manhattan at sunset as the city shifted from gold to orange to purple, and the towers began to glow like a field of fallen stars. And he thought about the mistakes that had led him here, that he had allowed Victoria to get close to Sophia, that when she came to pick up their daughter from school, the administration had called him and he had given permission because she was the girl's mother, because the law said a mother had rights, because he had believed that no matter how selfish or greedy Victoria was, she would never harm her own child. And he had been wrong. Catastrophically wrong. He who trusted no one had trusted the one person least deserving. He who controlled half the underworld of New York had let a woman he once loved steal the only thing that truly mattered. And now somewhere out there, his daughter might be hungry, might be cold, might be terrified, might already be dead. And Dominic laid his hand against the cold glass and looked down at the city spread beneath him like a glittering maze. And somewhere within those millions of lights, his little girl was either living or gone forever. And Dominic Vale, the man who ruled half the criminal underbelly of New York, had never felt so powerless. On the first day, Elena called the hospital at 6 a.m, before her shift was due to start, and she lied that she had the flu, forcing her voice to sound hoarse and exhausted. And her closest colleague Nina Chen picked up and went quiet for a few seconds. And Elena knew Nina did not believe her, because they had worked together for 3 years, survived countless bone-deep night shifts and patients dying in their hands. And Nina knew Elena never called in sick, not even when she truly was. But Nina did not question her, only told her to take care of herself and hung up. And Elena knew she would have to explain later. But later would come when it came, because right now she had a child to care for. and Sophia spent most of that first day asleep, her small body drained after 6 months of neglect. And one night fleeing through cold rain, and Elena sat beside the bed with a book, glancing up every so often just to be sure Sophia's chest was still rising and falling, not sure when watching a child breathe had become so important to her. And the second day began with screaming, Elena jolting upright from the sofa at 2 a.m, heart pounding as she ran to the bedroom where Sophia sat on the bed, eyes wide open yet seeing nothing, mouth torn with soundless cries. A nightmare. And Elena had known nights like that. It knew how it felt when a bad dream dragged you under and drowned you in terror you could not escape. So she climbed into the bed and gathered Sophia into her arms and began to sing, a lullaby her mother had once sung to her long before life became complicated. And she sang until Sophia stopped shaking, until those blue eyes closed, until the child's breathing grew slow and calm. But Elena could not sleep again, lying in the darkness with Sophia curled at her side, thinking about the man named Dominic Vale, and she had dug deeper into his world, letting Google spit back millions of results. Dominic Vale, chief executive of Vale Industries, the third largest real estate and finance conglomerate in New York. Dominic Vale, one of the richest men in the city with an estimated fortune in the billions. Dominic Vale, a widower and single father to a little girl. But there were other articles as well, the ones on the second and third pages of search results from smaller newspapers and braver investigative reporters, pieces that spoke of suspected ties to organized crime, of Dominic as the son of Antonio Vale, a man once indicted for money laundering and cleared for lack of evidence, of Dominic as the figure the Federal Bureau of Investigation had shadowed for 10 years, without ever collecting enough proof to charge him. And then Elena found the news segment from 6 months earlier, the Vale heiress missing and believed to have been abducted by her mother. The article paired with a photograph of Sophia beaming, dark curls glossy, blue eyes clear and untouched by sorrow, and beside that the image of Victoria Vale, the ex-wife, with calculating smile and cold eyes, and another of Dominic at a press conference, his face carved from stone, yet his eyes telling a different story, the eyes of a father breaking apart from the inside. And on the third day, Elena stood at the window of her apartment, looking down at the noisy Brooklyn street and wondering what she should do, whether to call the police who would deliver Sophia into the child protection system, and might return her to the very woman who had planned to kill her if Victoria still held legal custody, whether to call Dominic, who was either a mafia boss or at least tied to that world and might not be a safe harbor at all, whether to keep Sophia, though she was no one to lay claim to another person's child and had so little to offer, a one-bedroom apartment, a night shift job, and a heart that had been broken too many times. And then a small voice pulled her back. Miss Elena, and Sophia stood in the bedroom doorway in the oversized sweater, dark curls tangled, watching her with those frighteningly old eyes and asking if she was going to send her back to her father. And Elena knelt, so they were face to face, and asked if she wanted to go. And Sophia was silent for a very long time before she said in a whisper that she missed him, that he read to her, that he held her when she was afraid, that he called her his princess, and tears slid down her cheeks as she added that she was afraid her mother would find her again, afraid of Marcus, afraid of dying. And Elena looked at this little girl who in some impossible way had become the center of her universe in 72 hours, and told her she would not let anyone hurt her, but that her father deserved to know she was alive. And Sophia nodded slowly and asked if Elena would come with her to meet him, and Elena did not answer, because she did not yet know that the decision would soon be made for her. On the third day of the search, Dominic sat in his private office in the penthouse, surrounded by computer screens and by men who worked without pause, and they had already combed through thousands of security cameras from New Jersey to New York, from bus stations to subway platforms, from convenience stores to hospitals, millions of faces sliding past the monitors, and not one of them belonging to Sophia. And Dominic began to lose hope, not for the first time in the past 6 months, but this time more heavily, because this time he had come so close. This time he knew his daughter had been alive at least as recently as the week before. He knew she had escaped, yet a 6-year-old child alone on the streets of New York, with no money, no phone, no one to call. 3 days was far too long. Anything could happen in 3 days, and then his thoughts were cut off by the voice of Marco, one of his best hackers, saying, "Boss, I found something." And Dominic rose at once and went to stand over Marco's shoulder, staring at a security camera feed from a children's clothing store in Brooklyn. The timestamp showing the footage was from the day before, at 2 p.m, and in the image a brown-haired woman was leading a little girl between the racks of clothes, the child wearing an oversized sweater that clearly did not belong to her, dark hair a tumble of curls, a small, slight body, and when the woman knelt to hand her address, the camera caught the child's face. And Dominic stopped breathing, because it was Sophia. That was Sophia, his daughter, alive, and she was smiling, a small, tentative smile. Not the radiant grins he remembered, but it was a smile, his little girl alive and smiling, and he had to grip the back of a chair to keep his balance, because for 6 months he had believed he had lost his child. For 3 weeks he had buried his hope in an empty grave, and now on the grimy screen of this computer he was looking at a miracle, and he asked in a rough voice, "Who is that woman?" And Marco's fingers flew over the keys and the facial recognition program began to run, and a few minutes later a file appeared on the screen. Elena Carter, 27 years old, nurse at Brooklyn Community Hospital on the night shift, an address in Brooklyn, an apartment on Atlantic Avenue, no criminal record, and Dominic read the file, moving through each detail. Born in Boston, mother dead when she was 12, father gone even earlier, raised by a grandmother until the older woman passed away, married at 22 to Daniel Carter, and then he found the section he had been looking for, a medical report from nearly 4 years earlier. Elena Carter admitted to the hospital with broken ribs, bruises over her entire body, and signs of a miscarriage caused by trauma. The husband Daniel Carter never prosecuted because Elena refused to testify, and 6 months later Daniel Carter died in a car crash while driving drunk, leaving Elena a widow at 23 with no child, no family, no one at all. And Dominic looked at the photograph attached to the file, a face younger than its years with dark brown eyes holding something he recognized immediately. Loss, grief, and a hardness like steel forged in flame. And behind him Frank asked, "Who is she? A kidnapper or one of Victoria's accomplices?" And Dominic did not answer right away. He watched the footage again, the way this woman interacted with Sophia, the way she knelt to the child's eye level, instead of looking down at her from above. The way she let Sophia choose her own clothes and waited patiently. The way she laid a hand at the small of the girl's back, a gesture that was all protection and comfort. And he thought that was not how a kidnapper treats a hostage. That was how someone who cares behaves toward a child she wants to keep safe. And he said, "No raid. If we storm in, Sophia could be hurt in the chaos. Or this woman might panic and do something foolish. I will make contact directly." And Frank said, "Boss, she could be a trap. Victoria could have hired her." But Dominic shook his head and said, "Look at her. She is not the kind of person Victoria would hire, and my daughter is smiling. Sophia does not smile if she is afraid." And Frank did not argue, because he had worked with Dominic long enough to know when to hold his tongue. And Dominic picked up his phone and dialed the number Marco had just found, making the call himself, each ring stretching out like a year until the woman answered, her voice cautious and tired and, unexpectedly, gentle as she said hello. And Dominic closed his eyes for a heartbeat and forced his own voice to stay steady as he said, "I know you have my daughter. You have 30 minutes to bring her to the address I am about to send. And Miss Carter," he paused, "if the child has so much as one scratch she did not have before, I will burn your world to the ground." Elena stood in the middle of her living room with the phone still pressed to her ear, hearing nothing now except the rush of blood in her head, that voice cold as steel and sharp as a blade, and the last threat still echoing in the air, "I will burn your world to the ground." And she had heard threats before. Daniel had threatened her every day through 4 years of marriage, but his threats had always been the sound of a man out of control, fueled by rage and liquor and impulsive violence, whereas the voice she had just heard was entirely different, the voice of a man in full command of himself, a man who knew exactly what he was capable of and was entirely willing to do what he said. And then Sophia's voice pulled Elena back. "Miss Elena," and the girl stood in the bedroom doorway, curls tousled, blue eyes filled with worry, as she asked what was wrong and who was on the phone. And Elena lowered the handset and looked at the screen, seeing that an address had already arrived, accompanied by a short message that read 30 minutes, no police, no games, and she swallowed and forced her tone to stay calm as she said, your father has found us." And Sophia's reaction was not what Elena had expected. The child did not leap for joy. She did not burst into frightened tears. Instead, her small face grew strangely solemn, older than any 6-year-olds should be, and she asked in a trembling voice whether her father had found them, and whether he was angry, and Elena knelt so that their eyes were level as she had done many times in the past 3 days, and said that he had sounded very worried and perhaps a little angry, but not angry with her, that he only wanted his daughter safe. And Sophia watched her closely, as if weighing a choice of enormous importance, then asked, What about you? Is he angry at you? And Elena had no answer. She did not know what Dominic Vale would do with the stranger who had kept his daughter for 3 days without making contact, did not know whether he would see her as the woman who had saved his child, or as a kidnapper who had stolen her, did not know which version he would choose to believe, but she knew this much. She was not afraid. She had lived side by side with death for too long, through the nights when Daniel's hands closed on her throat until morning. Through the day she stood beside the grave of a child who had never been born, and death no longer made her shake. The only thing that frightened her now was the thought of Sophia being hurt, and to protect Sophia she needed to take the girl back to her father. So she said, "We are going to see your father. It is the right thing to do." And Sophia nodded, but her small hand reached for Elena's and held on tight as she asked, "You will come with me, inside?" And Elena promised, "I will go with you. I will not leave you alone." And they had 28 minutes, so Elena changed quickly, pulling on the cleanest shirt she owned, and the only pair of jeans without stains. And she had nothing elegant, nothing appropriate for meeting a billionaire in an upscale Manhattan restaurant. But she did not need to impress anyone. She only needed to deliver Sophia home safely, and she brushed out the girl's dark curls, working through the tangles and tying the hair into 2 small ponytails, then dressed her in the new blue dress they had bought the day before, the shade Sophia had chosen because it matched her eyes. And when they looked into the mirror, Elena saw 2 strangers, a thin woman with shadows under her eyes from lack of sleep, and a tiny girl with eyes that looked far too old. Nothing in common except their pain and the brief 3 days they had spent together, and yet somehow those 3 days had changed everything. And the taxi arrived in 10 minutes, and Elena helped Sophia into the back seat and gave the driver the address, a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of place Elena had never set foot in, and likely never would have been able to afford. And throughout the ride Sophia stayed silent, pressed close to Elena with her small hand clenched around Elena's, while Elena looked out the window and watched Brooklyn fall away behind them and Manhattan rise ahead, towers of glass and steel like giants, the world of Dominic Vale, a world Elena did not belong to. And she thought about what might happen when they arrived, that Dominic might thank her and let her go, that he might decide she was Victoria's accomplice and order his men to deal with her, that this might be the last time she ever saw Sophia, the last time she saw anything at all. And still she did not turn back, could not turn back, because Sophia needed to go home, and because, for the first time in many years, Elena was doing the right thing, not out of fear but out of choice. And when the restaurant came into view, all glass and steel and money, Elena gave Sophia's hand one last squeeze and said softly, "Whatever happens in there, I want you to know that meeting you has been the best thing that has happened to me in a very long time." And Sophia lifted those wise blue eyes to her and asked, "You will not leave me, will you?" And Elena could not answer, because the door was already opening. The restaurant was empty, the tables draped in spotless white cloth and lined up in orderly rows, the chairs pushed in neatly, crystal chandeliers casting a gentle golden glow, a place meant for lavish dinners and bottles of wine that cost thousands of dollars. But today it had been cleared for a different kind of meeting, and Elena stepped inside with her hand clasped tightly around Sophia's and felt the shift in the air at once, tension and danger, as if she were crossing into the territory of a wild animal guarding the one thing it valued most. 4 men in black stationed around the room, 1 at each corner, their eyes never leaving the 2 newcomers, bodyguards, the same kind she had read about in the articles, the kind of men who came with the title of Mafia boss. And in the center of the room, alone like the still heart of a storm, stood Dominic Vale. And when Elena saw him, she understood immediately why people were afraid of this man. Nearly 1.85 meters with broad shoulders, and the build of someone who trained not for vanity but for survival, dark hair a little longer than the typical businessman cut as if he no longer cared what anyone thought of his appearance, a square jaw, a strong nose, a small scar cutting through his left eyebrow, his face chiseled like stone, unreadable and without expression. But his eyes told another story, deep brown so dark they were almost black, and in them Elena saw something she recognized at once. Pain, deep and rough and worn in over too many years, the eyes of someone who had lost everything and did not know how to get it back. And Dominic saw them come in and his heart skipped. He had watched the footage hundreds of times in the last few hours, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Sophia, his daughter, flesh and blood, alive, thinner than he remembered, smaller, the same dark curls, the same blue eyes she had inherited from her mother. But something in her had changed. She looked as if she had lived through far more than any 6-year-old should ever endure. And Sophia saw him and went still, Her small hand clenched around Elena's, her body taut. 1 second, 2, 3, each as long as a lifetime, before her lips moved and she breathed out a single word. Daddy. And Dominic dropped to his knees. He did not order his body to do it. His knees simply folded as if some instinct knew he needed to be level with his child. He needed to become smaller so she would not be afraid. And tears slid down his face, and he did not try to stop them, could not have stopped them even if he had wanted to. 6 months of caged grief finally breaking loose, and he whispered, "Baby." His voice cracked and broken. No longer the voice of the man who ruled half the criminal underworld of New York, only the voice of a father who has lost his child and just found her again. And then Sophia let go of Elena's hand and ran, her small legs flying over the restaurant floor, the blue dress flaring, and she threw herself into his arms with all the strength of a child who has missed her father for far too long, and Dominic wrapped her up and held her as if he were afraid that if he loosened his grip even a little she would vanish once more, his shoulders shaking, his whole body trembling. And for the first time in 6 months, perhaps for the first time in many years, he wept without restraint, and Sophia whispered into his neck that she had missed him, that she had missed him so much, and he murmured back against her hair that he was sorry, that he should have protected her, that he should have found her sooner, that he was so sorry, and around them the 4 hard men turned their faces away, not because they did not want to look, but because some moments were so sacred and so private that to witness them felt like a violation, and Elena stood alone by the door watching the scene unfold, her chest tightening with a feeling she could not quite name, relief because Sophia was safe, and back in the arms of the person who loved her most, but also something else, a hollowness, a sense of loss, as if she had found something only to lose it again at once. 3 days, only 3 days, but in that time Sophia had rooted herself inside her, and now Elena was watching that part of herself being carried back to where it belonged, and Dominic rose at last after a long while, Sophia still in his arms with her head resting on his shoulder, and he turned toward Elena and his gaze shifted, the pain still there, but now layered with suspicion and wariness and calculation. "Who?" he asked, his voice back under control though still rough. "Who are you?" And Elena met his stare without blinking and without stepping back, and she told him the truth, about that night at the subway station, about the child crying in the rain, about the words "my mom says I have to die so daddy will be sad," about her decision to take Sophia home instead of calling the police, about the 3 days of care, the nightmares, the bruises on the little girl's arms. She told him everything in a steady clinical tone, as if she were reciting a medical report instead of describing the thing that had rearranged her life. And when she finished, Sophia lifted her head to look at her father and said, "Miss Elena saved me. Daddy, she is very nice. She holds me when I am scared. She sings me to sleep. Do not be mad at her." And Dominic studied the woman standing before him, smaller than he had expected, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of nights without sleep. Something in the way she held herself, reminding him of soldiers who had seen too much battle, and at last he asked, "Why? Why did you not call the police? Why did you keep my daughter?" And Elena held his gaze, unflinching, and said, "Because she begged me not to. Because sometimes the system fails the people who need it most." She paused. "And because I know what it feels like when no one comes to save you." And something shifted inside Dominic's chest, something he had not felt in a very long time. Dominic stood very still for a long moment, studying the woman in front of him, the woman who had done what his network of detectives and hackers had failed to do, the woman who had kept his daughter safe while his entire world was collapsing, the woman who asked for nothing in return. And when he finally spoke, the words felt heavy and unfamiliar in his mouth as he said, "Thank you," 2 simple syllables that did not belong to the life he led, because in his world people did not thank one another, they settled debts with money and power and protection. Yet with this woman he had no idea what currency could possibly be enough, no idea what could ever match the price of his child's life. And Elena dipped her head slightly, as if his gratitude were nothing out of the ordinary, as if he had thanked her for passing the salt instead of saving his heart, and she said calmly that he owed her nothing, that he should take care of the little girl, and that was all she wanted. Then she turned and walked toward the door, each step steady and unhesitating, as if leaving were something she had practiced all her life, as if she had long ago learned to walk away from the things she cared about before they had a chance to abandon her. But she had not gone more than 3 steps when a cry tore through the room, "Do not go," and Sophia wriggled out of Dominic's arms and ran after her, small feet stumbling on the gleaming restaurant floor as she wrapped herself around Elena's legs, tears streaming down her cheeks as she begged her not to leave, reminded her that she had promised, that she had said she would not abandon her. And Elena froze for a heartbeat, her body going rigid as if someone had struck her square in the chest. Then she slowly knelt and gathered Sophia close, holding her as if this truly were the last time, and perhaps it was, and in a shaking whisper, she told the child that she would be all right, that she had her father now, and he would protect her and loved her more than anything. But Sophia sobbed that she wanted Elena, that Elena had found her and sung her to sleep and chased the fear away, and Elena closed her eyes and Dominic saw a single tear slide down her face, just one, quickly wiped away as if she were ashamed of letting anyone see a crack in her armor. And she repeated that the girl would be all right, her voice turning firmer, as if she were trying harder to convince herself than the child, telling Sophia she was stronger than she knew, that she had run alone through the freezing dark and survived, that she could do anything, and she pressed a kiss to the girl's forehead and gently pried those small, desperate fingers from her shirt, then rose, did not look back, and walked out, this time without stopping, though Sophia's sobs followed her and every step felt like stone, and everything in her wanted to turn around, and the door closed behind Elena, while Dominic stood holding his weeping daughter and watching the faint outline of the woman disappear beyond the glass. Something in the way she left lodging in his mind, the clean break, the hidden hurt, the way she surrendered what mattered without asking for a thing, as if she had long ago accepted that she did not deserve to be kept. And he said, "Frank," his voice low, and the gray-haired man was at his side at once. "Yes, boss." And Dominic told him to follow her, to protect her from a distance and never let her know. And Frank hesitated only long enough to ask if she was dangerous. And Dominic said no, but she had saved his daughter and that made her a target, that Marcus and Victoria might already know about her, and there were others who would gladly hurt anyone he owed in order to hurt him. And Frank nodded and said he understood. That night, in the penthouse Dominic had believed would remain empty forever, he sat beside his daughter's bed for the first time in 6 months. Sophia bathed and dressed in the old princess pajamas she had loved, lying beneath the pink canopy he had refused to take down. Mr. Buttons nestled once more in her arms, finally reunited with the child who had named him. But Sophia did not sleep. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, blue eyes glossy with unshed tears, and when Dominic tucked the blanket up beneath her chin, she whispered, "Daddy?" And he answered, "What is it, my princess?" And she said that Miss Elena had told her she had no family, that she lived alone, and Dominic's hand stilled as he said he knew. And the girl turned her head and looked at him with eyes far too wise for 6 years, asking if they could be her family, and the question hit Dominic like a bullet he never saw coming. 2 days later, Elena slipped back into her old life as if nothing had changed, back to night shifts at the hospital, 12 hours under harsh fluorescent light, tending to patients who did not know her name and would forget her as soon as they walked out, back to the empty apartment waiting for her each morning, with 1 cup on the shelf, and 1 pair of slippers by the door, and a silence so thick it felt like something you had to push through, and everything looked exactly the same as before she met Sophia, yet everything felt different. Because now she noticed how bare the bed was in a way she never had. Now she caught herself listening for small footsteps that never came. Now she found herself cooking breakfast for 2 and standing puzzled over the extra portion, unsure why she had made it. And she missed Sophia. 3 days, only 3 days, but enough to carve out a space inside her she did not know how to fill. And memories rose up as she lay in bed after another draining shift. Memories of the last time she had felt necessary to someone, 4 years earlier when she had discovered she was pregnant, the brief 2 months before Daniel's fists took that future away. 2 months, when she had talked to a flat belly and built a life in her mind, and believed she finally had a reason to exist. All of it wiped out in a single night of violence and blood, the doctors telling her she would not be able to conceive again, Daniel telling her it was her fault, and Elena believing them both. The knock at the door dragged her from the dark spiral of her thoughts, and when she opened it, a gray-haired man stood in the hallway. One she recognized from the restaurant, the guard who had stayed closest to Dominic, and he addressed her as Miss Carter in a courteous voice that left no room for refusal, saying that Mr. Vale wanted to see her, and Elena almost said no, almost closed the door and tried to forget, but then she thought of Sophia and the blue eyes wet with tears as she walked away, the broken "please do not go" that still echoed inside her, and she followed Frank. Half an hour later, she stood in the foyer of the penthouse and felt as if she had stumbled into another planet. Italian marble beneath her feet, expensive paintings lining the walls, floor-to-ceiling glass opening over all of Manhattan, glittering like spilled jewels, and her entire apartment could have fit into this living room with space to spare, and she knew with the same certainty she needed air that she did not belong here, when a shrill, delighted cry and the patter of small feet broke across the polished floor. Miss Elena and Sophia flew down the hallway, a rush of dark curls and thin arms that slammed into Elena with all the force a 6-year-old body could muster, and Elena dropped to her knees to catch her. And when those little arms wrapped around her neck and the familiar scent of children's shampoo brushed her senses, something inside her chest shattered and stitched itself together at the same time, and Sophia whispered that she had missed her so very much. And at the far end of the hallway, Dominic watched, and when Elena lifted her head, their eyes met, and he walked toward them and addressed her as Miss Carter, saying he had a proposal, that he wanted her to become Sophia's caregiver. The offer wrapped in terms that would have sounded like fantasy to anyone else. A salary higher than anything the hospital could ever pay. A private room in this penthouse. Round-the-clock security. Everything she could possibly need. And Elena shook her head before he finished, saying she did not belong in this world, that she was a night shift nurse from Brooklyn, that she knew nothing of his life, or the people he dealt with, or the dangers that came with standing close to him. And Dominic did not argue. He simply said in a low, tired voice that Sophia needed her, that the child could not sleep without her nearby, that for 2 nights she had woken screaming and calling Elena's name, that he could give his daughter everything on earth and still never replace the woman who had scooped her up from a cold, wet night and brought her into the light. And Elena looked down at Sophia, clinging to her as if letting go would make her vanish. And she thought of the empty apartment, the sleepless nights, the hollow ache she had no idea how to soothe, and she heard herself say 1 month. I will try for 1 month. And Sophia's face lit up like Christmas morning, and though Dominic's expression did not change, something in his eyes softened in a way almost too small to see as he agreed to 1 month, and none of them truly believed that a single month would ever be enough. Elena moved into the penthouse with a single small suitcase that held everything she owned, a few changes of clothes, a handful of books, an old photograph of her mother, and nothing else. 27 years of life packed into something she could lift with one hand, and she did not know whether that was something to be ashamed of or quietly proud of. And her room was at the end of the hallway next to Sophia's. And when she opened the door and stepped inside, she had to stop for a moment just to breathe, because this room alone was larger than her entire old Brooklyn apartment, with a king-size bed dressed in Egyptian cotton sheets, a walk-in closet, a private bathroom with a tub big enough for 3 people, and floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the Manhattan skyline, glittering like a dream she would never have dared to dream for herself. And when she set her little suitcase down in the corner, it looked pitifully small in all that luxury, and she felt as out of place as a fish set down in the middle of a desert. But she was not here for the room. She was here for the little girl standing in the doorway, watching her with bright blue eyes and a smile that for the first time carried no shadow of fear. And so the new life began, with Elena waking Sophia every morning, getting her into her school uniform, parting and smoothing those dark curls into 2 neat ponytails, taking her to school in a car with a driver, a strange extravagance that took Elena 3 days to stop flinching at, then picking her up in the afternoon and listening as Sophia chattered about friends and teachers and homework she did not understand, the 2 of them cooking together in a kitchen bigger than most restaurants, burning cookies and overcooking pasta and laughing when their experiments failed, reading stories before bed about princesses and knights and happy endings that real life rarely delivered, and day by day Sophia began to heal. Her smile came more often, her laughter spilled into the rooms more easily. The nightmares still came but less frequently, and when they did, Elena was there to hold her until the shadows retreated, and Elena also began to study the world. Dominic moved in, watching the late-night phone calls where his voice dropped low and lethal beyond the soundproofed walls, seeing the men who came and went with hard faces and watchful eyes, the kind of men you did not ask about if you had any sense, seeing Frank forever nearby like the boss's shadow, always ready for whatever order came, seeing secretive suitcases carried in and out and closed-door meetings she was never invited to, the clear outlines of the Mafia world she had stepped into and was now living at its center. And yet she saw something else too, that no matter how busy he was or how important the deal, Dominic always made it home in time to read to Sophia before sleep, that she would find him seated at his daughter's bedside, that deep voice of his giving patient life to fairy tales, even though she knew those hands turning the pages had done things she did not want to picture, that the way he looked at Sophia was with an intensity that said she was his entire world and nothing else existed when she was in the room. And slowly Elena arrived at a truth she had not expected, that Dominic Vale was not a monster. He was a father wearing a monster's skin, a man willing to become the devil itself to shield his angel. and sometimes in the late hours when the penthouse lay hushed and dark they would meet by chance in the hallway. Elena on her way to get a glass of water, Dominic just returning from some place she did not wish to know about, and they would nod to each other without speaking. And still there was something in those wordless moments, recognition, respect, two strangers learning how to share the same space for the sake of the child they both loved. And she had been there for 2 weeks when Sophia suddenly asked a question she did not expect. "Miss Elena," the girl said, while Elena brushed her hair before bed, "do you think my dad is scary?" And Elena paused with the brush in midair and weighed her answer, thinking of the man she had been watching for 14 days, the ruthless edge in his voice on the phone, the gentleness in the way he kissed his daughter's forehead goodnight. And at last she said slowly that she thought her father was the kind of man who would burn the whole world to keep her safe, and that this was not fear, it was love, a very dangerous kind of love. The scream tore through the night at 2 a.m, and Elena was on her feet before her mind had fully woken, hitting the floor, running and reaching Sophia's door at the same moment Dominic did, the two of them nearly colliding in the dark hallway. And without a word they went inside together to find Sophia upright in bed with her eyes wide open and unseeing, her mouth spilling broken pleas. Do not, please do not," caught in the worst nightmare she had had since coming home. And Elena climbed into the bed first, pulling the girl against her chest and beginning to sing the familiar lullaby, while Dominic took the other side, his large hand moving slowly along his daughter's back, his deep voice murmuring reassurances, the two of them working together as if they had rehearsed this for years. No instructions, no discussion, and after 20 minutes, Sophia's breathing smoothed out and she slipped back into sleep with her face buried against Elena, and they eased her down, tucked the blanket under her chin, and left the room in silence. Yet neither of them went back to their own beds, and as if obeying an unspoken agreement they walked together to the kitchen, where Dominic made coffee, 2 cups, without asking whether Elena wanted any, and they sat across from each other at the marble island, under the soft yellow light that carved a small circle of warmth out of the sleeping penthouse, the quiet stretching between them, until Dominic broke it with a voice lower and more tired than usual, telling her to tell him, and when she looked puzzled he clarified, "About you," that he had read her file and knew what the paperwork said but wanted to hear it from her, and Elena wrapped her hands around the cup and stared into the dark surface, and did not know exactly why she chose honesty, perhaps because it was so late, perhaps because he did not look at her with pity or judgment, perhaps because she was simply tired of carrying everything alone, and she began to talk about Daniel, about the years of beatings and insults, about the night she discovered she was pregnant and believed it would be a new beginning, about the brief 2 months of fragile happiness before Daniel came home drunk and knocked her down the stairs, about the blood, about the doctor's words that she would never have children again, about the way she could not leave because she had no money and nowhere to go and no one to call, about Daniel's death in a crash when he plowed his car into a light pole too drunk to steer straight, and her voice stayed even all the way through, as if she were narrating the story of someone else. No emotion, no tears, only stark, cold fact. And she told him that she had not cried when he died, that she had felt relief, as if a boulder had been lifted from her chest, that everyone thought she was grieving her husband while she was actually hiding, how glad she was that he was gone. And when she finally lifted her gaze to Dominic, she said that made her feel like a monster, and he set his cup down and did not look away, as he told her she was not a monster, that she was a survivor, and that there was a difference, that the monster was the one who did those things to her, and the survivor was the one who endured them, and still had enough kindness left to pull a stranger's child out of a cold rain. And she did not answer, but something inside her loosened, a knot she had carried for 4 years without ever naming. And then she asked about him, about Victoria, what had happened. And Dominic went quiet, as if weighing whether to open that door, and then he began to speak in a distant tone, telling her he had met Victoria when they were young, that she had been beautiful and clever and hungry for success, and that he had believed she loved him, and perhaps at the start she had, but she could not bear the life that came with him, the danger and the secrets and the constant uncertainty of whether the day he walked out might be the last time she saw him alive. And he paused for a long breath before saying she had left when Sophia was 3, not fighting for custody, not even looking back, and he had thought she still loved their daughter, thought at least that much was real. Then he gave a bitter little laugh and said, "It turned out the only thing she loved was what Sophia could be used for, money and leverage and a way to hurt him." And their eyes met across the stone counter and held, the silence deep and oddly gentle, until Dominic said quietly, "Thank you for telling me," and Elena answered, "Thank you for listening." And it was the first true conversation between them, but it would not be the last. 1 month passed and Elena did not mention leaving, and Dominic did not bring up the 1-month agreement they had made, both of them knowing the deadline had slipped by and both pretending not to remember, and life in the penthouse settled into a familiar rhythm. Mornings of taking Sophia to school, afternoons of reading and homework, evenings of shared dinners when Dominic was not pulled away by meetings or some unnamed business, and those late-night conversations in the kitchen became more frequent, sometimes after one of Sophia's nightmares and sometimes simply because neither of them could sleep, and Elena began to understand Dominic in ways she had never expected, realizing he was not a bad man pretending to be good but a good man who had chosen to do bad things in order to protect what he loved. A distinction thin as a razor's edge yet real all the same, and then the call came, catching Dominic in his office when the phone rang with an unfamiliar number, one he almost ignored until some dark instinct made him answer, and the voice that greeted him turned his blood to ice. Vale, a long time no see, Marcus, the name of the man Dominic had hunted for half a year, the one who had helped Victoria steal his daughter and had tried to have Sophia killed, now speaking as if they were old friends, saying he had heard Dominic had found the girl. Poor Victoria, who had not been smart enough to hold on to her hostage. But Marcus was different, and when Dominic asked what he wanted, his voice as flat as the surface of a lake before a storm, Marcus replied that he wanted $10 million wired to an account he would send, and in return he would vanish forever. Dominic never hearing from him again, and when Dominic asked, "What if I refuse?" even though he already knew, Marcus laughed, a sound that made Dominic want to smash the phone, and said he knew where the girl was, in the penthouse on top of Manhattan, security tight but nothing impossible to breach, and he also knew about the brown-haired woman, Elena Carter, a nurse who lived alone with no family, taking good care of Dominic's daughter, and what a pity it would be if something happened to her. And silence stretched for 3 slow seconds before Dominic answered, his voice so cold it could have frozen the air, that if Marcus touched any of them he would not only kill him but erase everything he had ever cared about, every person he had ever known, every place he had ever set foot, until Marcus wished he had never been born. And Marcus only laughed and cut the line, and Dominic stood staring at the phone in his hand for a moment, before hurling it against the wall, the screen shattering, the plastic casing splitting, his fury untouched. And 10 minutes later, Elena stood in his office looking at the broken pieces on the floor and the darkness in his face as he told her everything, about Marcus, about the call, about the threats aimed at her and Sophia, and Elena listened without visible expression, then fell silent when he finished, and asked in a level voice that surprised him what he planned to do. And he said he would increase security, double the guards, that she and Sophia were not to leave the penthouse until he had dealt with Marcus, and when she asked bluntly whether he would deal with him, he studied her and asked if she really wanted the answer, and she met his gaze without blinking, and said no. She did not need to know, she only needed to know that Sophia would be safe, and he asked if she was not afraid, sounding as if he genuinely wanted to understand. And Elena tilted her head, considering, and said she had lived with a monster before, 4 years in a house with a man who might kill her at any moment, that she knew how to live with fear, and more importantly, she knew what she was willing to do to protect the people she cared about. And Dominic fell quiet, examining the slight, narrow-shouldered woman before him, a woman who looked anything but dangerous and yet carried the same hardened glint he recognized in her dark eyes, steel forged in fire. And the days that followed grew taut as a wire, with guards doubled. Sophia kept home from school, Elena forbidden to step outside the penthouse, every door watched, every call monitored, the air in the apartment heavy and close like the hush before a hurricane. And one night, after Sophia was asleep, Dominic found Elena standing by the window, looking out at the city, and told her in a low, dangerous voice that he would not let anyone touch either of them. And she turned to him with steady eyes and said she knew, but that if it came to it she wanted him to understand that she would kill anyone who tried to hurt that little girl. And he studied her for a long time and said that he believed she would, and it was not praise but acknowledgement. A week later, the trap was sprung, though not the one they expected. Frank received urgent intelligence from a trusted source claiming Marcus had been spotted in a warehouse in Queens, preparing for an immediate strike. Dominic, driven by the ferocious need to end the threat before it could reach his doorstep, made the fatal decision to go on the offensive. He did not want to wait for the war to come to Sophia. He wanted to end it tonight. He did not want to leave the penthouse. Not now. Not while Marcus still breathed. But this was work he could not refuse. So he left Frank and 12 guards behind, twice the usual number, kissed Sophia's forehead as she slept, nodded to Elena standing outside the child's door, and stepped into the elevator, never guessing he was walking into a trap, and 20 minutes after he left it began. Elena was sitting in the living room reading when she heard the first shot, that sharp, dry crack from the level below where the lobby of the penthouse was, followed by shouting and more gunfire, and she flung the book aside and ran with only one thought in her mind: Sophia. Elena sprinted down the hall, burst into the room, and found Sophia sitting up in bed, blue eyes wide with fear, and Elena had no time for explanations, scooping her up and running for the end of the hallway, to the panic room Dominic had shown her. The gunfire grew louder, heavy footsteps pounding up the stairs, and Elena reached the safe room, punched in the code, and set Sophia inside. Just as she was about to step inside and seal them both in, she heard the heavy boots of men rounding the corner. A terrifying realization hit her. If the attackers saw the heavy steel door closing, they would know exactly where Sophia was hidden. They would bring drills, explosives, anything to get in. To save Sophia, the secret of the room had to remain a secret, so Elena made the hardest choice of her life. She kissed Sophia's forehead, whispered, "Stay quiet no matter what," and closed the door from the outside. Turning back toward the hallway, she saw the body of a fallen guard lying motionless. She did not know his name, only that he had died trying to hold this place. She snatched the gun from his hand, checked the round's 6 bullets, and ran back toward the open living room, screaming and firing wildly, deliberately making herself the target to draw the wolves away from the lamb. Marcus appeared at the far end of the corridor, tall and solid, 4 armed men at his back. He cornered her in the kitchen, far away from the hidden hallway, and looked around, furious and confused, realizing the girl was not with her. "Where is the brat?" he snarled, raising his weapon. "Tell me where you hid her, and I might make your death quick." Elena, bleeding from a graze on her arm and backed against the marble counter, looked him in the eye. She knew she had bought Sophia enough time. She raised her chin, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "You will never find her, and Dominic is coming for you." Marcus laughed, a sound that made her stomach twist, and raised his gun to end it. But he managed only 2 steps before gunfire erupted behind him from the stairwell. Not from Elena's hand but from Dominic's, because the meeting had been a trap, though Marcus had underestimated how quickly Dominic would see it, and he had turned back with Frank and 5 remaining guards and driven straight into Marcus's men from the rear, and everything dissolved into chaos, blood and bullets and the deafening roar of shots in a confined space. Elena pressed against the wall with her gun still trained forward, firing at anyone who tried to push toward the safe room, not knowing whom she hit, only knowing she would let no one near Sophia, and then it was over almost as suddenly as it began. Marcus sprawled on the floor with a hole in his forehead, Dominic's arm still extended from the shot. Victoria somewhere among Marcus's people who had stormed the penthouse, trying to run and being cut down by one of Marcus's own gunmen in the panicked retreat, falling in a corner of the hall with her eyes staring up at the ceiling, no longer beautiful or calculating, only empty. And the silence that followed was eerie after the storm, and Dominic stepped over bodies and blood and spent shells until he found Elena standing in a pool of someone else's blood, with the gun still raised, her whole body between the panic room door and the world, her hands shaking but the muzzle steady, and she rasped in a rough, broken voice that the little girl was safe, that Sophia was safe. And Dominic crossed the room in 3 long strides and did something he had never planned to do, pulling Elena into his arms and holding her as if she were the only solid thing left in a world that had just exploded around them. The days after the attack passed in a hazy fog of cleaning and covering up, Dominic putting people on it who knew exactly what to do. Bodies carried away, blood scrubbed from floors and walls, shell casings gathered up. The penthouse repaired until it looked as if nothing had happened, as if these walls had never watched death and violence unfold. And to the outside world, the story was that there had been a small fire, an electrical fault. No police, no reporters, only silence bought and paid for with money and power. Marcus dead and his organization collapsing within days without anyone to lead it, the remaining men either captured by Dominic's people or fleeing the city or dying in dark alleys when they tried to strike back. Victoria buried in a quiet cemetery on the outskirts of town under a simple stone, with no mourners but the minister. Dominic paying for the funeral but not attending because he could not and he would not, and he told Sophia about her mother's death the morning after the attack, when the girl had been let out of the panic room and had cried herself empty from fear, sitting beside her bed and holding her hand while he told her the truth in the simplest words he could, that her mother was gone and would not be coming back. And Sophia cried, but less than he had expected, less than any child should cry when losing her mother, and after a while she lifted her head, blue eyes wet yet strangely steady, and said that her mother had not loved her the way her father and Miss Elena did, that she was sad but she was not broken, and Dominic gathered his daughter into his arms and did not know whether to weep or be proud of her strength, perhaps both at once. While Sophia recovered with the startling speed of children, Elena began to sink, hiding it as best she could, forcing smiles when Sophia was near, forcing normalcy when Dominic watched. But Dominic saw anyway, saw the way her hands trembled when she held a cup of coffee, the way she flinched at every sudden sound, the way her gaze slipped out of focus as if she were staring at something no one else could see, the way she no longer slept or woke, gasping and drenched in sweat when she did, the way she ate less, spoke less, laughed almost not at all, coming apart from the inside while believing no one noticed. On the 5th night after the attack, Dominic found her sitting alone on the balcony at 2 a.m, December air slicing cold and she in only a thin shirt as if she could not feel it or did not care, and he stepped outside to stand beside her without a word, the two of them looking down at the quiet city and the millions of lights shining like fallen stars, until Elena said in a voice soft as wind that she had killed someone that night, and he did not need to ask which night, that she had pulled the trigger, and a man had dropped and she did not know his name or whether he had a family or whether he was evil or simply a hired hand in need of money, and she paused for a shuddering breath and said that what frightened her was that she did not regret it, that she felt she ought to feel something, guilt or sorrow or remorse, but every time she thought of it, all she could see was Sophia hiding in that dark room, and she knew she would do it again, that she would kill again 100 times if it kept the girl safe, and she asked if that meant she was a monster too, and Dominic sat down beside her with their shoulders almost touching, and told her in a low, sure voice that she had done what needed to be done to protect someone she loved, that this did not make her a monster but a warrior, that the monsters were the men who had stormed the home to harm a child, that the monster was Victoria, who had sold her own daughter for money, that the monster was Marcus, who had laughed while ordering the death of a 6-year-old girl, that Elena was not a monster but the person who had stood between the darkness and the light and chosen to defend the light at any cost. And she turned to look at him, his face half in shadow and half washed in the city's golden glow, and she asked how he lived with the things he had done, and he answered that he did not live with them so much as keep walking in spite of them, for the sake of those who mattered. And in the dark his hand found hers, and neither of them pulled away. 3 months slipped by like a dream Elena hardly dared to believe was real, winter easing into spring, snow melting off Manhattan streets while life in the penthouse slowly found its rhythm again, Sophia returning to school, now at a prestigious private academy with tight security and tuition, equal to a year of Elena's nurse's salary, making new friends, children who knew nothing about her past, nothing about 6 months of captivity or the night she ran through the rain, and once a week Sophia visited a child psychologist, a silver-haired woman with a gentle voice and an office full of toys, sessions the girl hated at first but during which she slowly began to talk about the nightmares and the fear and the memories she had tried so hard to bury, and piece by piece the wounds began to heal. Elena was still in the penthouse and no one spoke of her leaving, not Dominic, not Sophia, not even Elena herself, her role having grown far beyond the title of nanny, the one who woke Sophia every morning, who listened to school stories every afternoon, who held her when nightmares came back at night, the one who sat beside Dominic at quiet dinners, who shared coffee with him on sleepless nights, who understood him in ways very few people were allowed to. And Dominic changed as well. The secret meetings and late-night calls still there, but something in him shifting, slowly redirecting his empire from shadow into light. More legitimate deals, less violence, less blood on his hands, and when Elena asked him about it one night, he said it was for Sophia and for the future, that he did not want his daughter to grow up ashamed of what her father had done, did not want her to live in constant fear that his past would come reaching for her, that the empire would change or he would burn it down from within. The connection between Dominic and Elena grew in ways neither had planned, shared dinners for 3 becoming routine, the 3 of them around the table like a real family, the late-night kitchen conversations stretching longer and reaching deeper into the dark corners they showed no one else. The accidental brushes of hands, the glances that lasted a beat too long, the moments when the air between them hung heavy with something unspoken. And one afternoon, while Elena was helping Sophia with homework, the girl looked up and said something that made Elena's heart stop. "Mama Elena, I do not understand this problem." 2 simple words, Mama Elena, spoken naturally as if it were obvious, as if she had always called her that. And then Sophia realized what she had said, blue eyes flying wide with worry as she stumbled over an apology and tried to correct herself. And Elena smiled with a tremor and told her it was all right, that it did not matter what she called her, and they went back to the homework as if nothing had happened. But that night in her own room, Elena wept, sitting on the bed with the pillow wet beneath her cheek, crying for the child she had lost. For the years she believed she would never hear anyone call her by that name, for the dark-haired little girl who had given her a second chance she had never dared to hope for. A week later, Tommy came to visit. Elena's younger brother, 24 years old and 18 months clean, with a steady job as a mechanic and eyes clearer than she could ever remember, standing in the penthouse foyer, staring around him in disbelief before looking at his sister as if she were a stranger and asking if she was kidding him, that she really lived here with a billionaire and a child who called her mama. And Elena showed him around, introduced him to Sophia, who immediately bombarded him with 1,000 questions about cars and engines. And later, after Sophia had gone to bed, they sat over coffee in the kitchen, and Tommy looked at his sister with a gaze as piercingly perceptive as it was gentle, and said she loved Dominic and should not bother denying it because he could see it plain as day, and Elena stared into her cup and said it was complicated. And Tommy replied that his big sister was living with a mafia boss, raising his daughter, and looking at him as if he had hung the moon in the sky, and that complicated was putting it mildly. And Elena laughed, really laughed for the first time in many months, the sound rising from her chest, light and unforced, feeling like coming home. Elena made her decision on a morning as ordinary as any other, standing in the kitchen watching Sophia eat breakfast and laugh about something that had happened at school, watching Dominic read the newspaper with a cup of coffee in his hand. And in that quiet hum of domestic life she suddenly understood that she did not truly belong inside this picture, that she was the outsider who had stayed too long, that Sophia was all right now, laughing more than she cried, sleeping through most nights without nightmares, with friends, and the everyday rhythm of a normal child's life, that the little girl no longer needed Elena at her side every second, that she had a father, a home, everything a child should have. And what did Elena have? A small, empty apartment in Brooklyn she was still paying rent on every month, a night nurse job she had taken unpaid leave from for far too long, a life of her own she had left behind when she stepped into this world, and it was time, she thought, to go back to it. And she waited until Sophia was asleep to speak to Dominic, finding him in his office with the desk lamp casting a pool of gold over the papers in front of him. And when he looked up at her knock, there was something in his eyes that almost made her change her mind. But she could not keep living in this suspended state, never quite knowing who she was in this house or whether she had any right to stay. So she said she thought it was time for her to leave, that Sophia was all right now and did not need her anymore. And Dominic set his pen down and simply looked at her for so long that the silence pressed on her chest like a weight, and she almost filled it with explanations and excuses and tidy reasons. When he finally spoke and asked, "And if I need you, what then?" And the question stunned her into stillness, because she was not sure she had heard him right. This man who seemed never to need anyone saying that he needed her. And Dominic rose and came around the desk toward her, each footstep echoing in the quiet room, while Elena found she could not move or even breathe, only watch him draw closer. And he said in that low, rough voice of his that he was not good at these things, at feelings and saying how he felt, that he had lost Victoria because he did not know how to love properly, had thought money and power were enough and had been wrong, that he had lost Sophia for 6 months because he trusted the wrong person and believed Victoria still had some scrap of humanity in her and had been wrong again, and he stopped a single pace away so she could see every line in his face, the new crow's feet at the corners of his eyes and the deep tiredness he tried to hide behind the hard mask. And then his voice softened in a way she had never heard, as he told her that she was the one thing he did not want to lose, that he had lost too much already and he could not lose her too. And Elena could not speak, all the careful arguments she had prepared, disintegrating like smoke. And so she did, the only thing she could think to do, stepping closer, laying her hand over his heart, and kissing him. And their first kiss was not gentle or storybook sweet, but sudden and hungry and desperate, like two drowning people who had finally found each other in the middle of an endless sea, like two souls who had been alone for far too long and realized they no longer had to be. And Dominic froze for a heartbeat, as if he could not quite believe this was happening. Then his arms closed around her waist and pulled her nearer, and he kissed her back with everything he had been holding in for so many months. And they kissed until they were both out of breath, until the world beyond that office vanished, until there was nothing left but the two of them in that bright room surrounded by documents and secrets and jagged histories. And when they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm across her lips, and said, "Stay," not as a command but as a plea. And she whispered that she had never really planned to leave, that she had just needed to hear him ask. 1 year, 12 months, 365 days since that rainy November night when Elena had found a little girl crying in an abandoned subway station, and sometimes she still could not quite believe her life had been turned inside out because of a single choice not to keep walking. And now Sophia was 7, taller and stronger, her dark curls shining and her blue eyes bright with laughter, calling her Mama Elena as easily as breathing, without the hesitation or fear of that first time, racing home each afternoon with stories about school and friends, and the teacher she adored, sleeping through the night without nightmares, crying less than she laughed, looking toward the future with hope instead of dread. And Dominic and Elena had never made anything official. No wedding, no rings, no papers binding their names together, but they lived as husband and wife in every way that mattered, sharing a bedroom, a life, a child, arguing over small, silly things, and making up before they went to sleep, holding hands on the sofa while they watched films with Sophia, building a family out of the wreckage of their separate tragedies. And somehow it worked, and Vale Industries had shifted 70% of its operations into legitimate business, real estate and investments and technology. Clean deals with clean partners, the remaining 30% slowly being transformed piece by piece in ways that did not leave bodies in the streets or people abandoned in the dark. All for Sophia. Dominic kept saying, for the future, so that when his daughter grew up, she could be proud of the family she came from rather than forced to hide it. And Tommy worked for the company now, running one of the repair shops in a chain of car service centers Vale Industries owned. 18 months sober, clear-eyed and steady, paying rent on a modest apartment in Queens, coming to dinner every Sunday to tease Sophia and argue with Dominic about football, like they had known each other all their lives. And perhaps they had, because family was not always defined by blood. Sometimes it was defined by the people who chose to stay. And on a soft November morning, exactly 1 year after that night in the station, the three of them went to visit Victoria's grave, the cemetery quiet under pale autumn sun, yellow leaves scattered over the still stones, and Sophia carried a bouquet of white flowers to lay carefully at the simple headstone, and stood there for a long time, reading the name, her small face serious in a way a 7-year-old's should not have to be, and she said she was no longer angry with her mother, only sad that her mother had never found happiness, that she wished her mother could see her now with a father, with Mama Elena, with Uncle Tommy, with a family that loved her, that she wished her mother could have had that too. And Elena stood behind her with tears slipping silently down her cheeks, her hand finding Dominic's and his grip tightening around hers without a word, because there are moments when language is redundant, and this was one of them. The three of them standing together before the grave of the woman who had once been his wife and Sophia's mother, and the source of so much pain and loss, but who, in a strange, twisted way, had also set in motion the path that led them to one another. And on the way back to the car, with Sophia running ahead to chase a butterfly, Elena asked quietly if he thought Victoria would have wanted this. I wanted them to be happy. And Dominic considered it in silence before saying no, that he had stopped caring what Victoria wanted on the night she took his daughter, and that the only thing that mattered now was what they built from here. Late that night, with Sophia asleep in her room holding Mr. Buttons tight against her chest, Dominic and Elena sat out on the penthouse balcony, looking down at Manhattan, glittering beneath them. The city that never slept, shining like a field of stars laid out on the earth, and for a rare moment everything felt peaceful. And Dominic said that a year earlier he had thought his life was over, that he had sat in Sophia's room every night talking to a child he believed dead, and waiting for the day his own lungs would simply stop, and Elena rested her head on his shoulder, warmth seeping into her bones, and answered that a year ago she had not known whether she was living or merely existing, working, going home, sleeping, repeating, with nothing to look forward to, no one to care for, a ghost drifting through a life that did not really belong to her, and they let the silence settle, honoring the past before letting it go. And then they spoke of the future, of the schools Sophia might attend when she was older, of expanding the lawful side of Vale Industries, of the house in the suburbs Dominic was thinking of buying where Sophia could have a yard and Elena could plant flowers, of Tommy and his work, of maybe, someday, a small wedding with only the people they loved. And suddenly Elena heard herself ask if he thought they deserved to be happy after everything that had happened, and Dominic took his time with the answer, as he always did with anything she said, finally admitting he did not know, that he had done terrible things and she had endured terrible things, that perhaps they did not deserve it, but he knew they would try to become worthy of it, every day, one day at a time, until it was true. And Elena leaned her head more fully against his shoulder and watched the city lights flicker like fallen stars, remembering that a year ago she had been a ghost walking through a life that did not fit, that a year ago she had paused in an abandoned station because a child was crying, that she had not believed in destiny then, and was not sure she did now, but she believed in the warmth of Sophia's arms flung around her neck every morning, in the way Dominic looked at her as if she were something precious instead of broken, in the home they had built from the rubble of their separate disasters, and she remembered what it felt like in another life, with another monster, when no one came to save her and knew something different now, that sometimes you stumble into saving someone else, and when you do, you end up saving yourself. And when Dominic asked what she was thinking, she smiled and told him she was thinking about how close she had come to walking past that night, that she had almost kept going, but she had not, and that single choice had changed everything. The story of Elena, Dominic, and Sophia stands as a testament to the power of kindness and to the way small choices can alter an entire life, that sometimes a single moment of stopping, of choosing to listen to someone's crying instead of turning away, can open a door to miracles we would never have dared to imagine. And the lesson their story carries is this: never underestimate the force of simple compassion. Never believe you are too broken to be loved or too fragile to protect someone else. And never stop trusting that after the darkest nights, the dawn will still come. And if you feel this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, click like and share this video so we can continue bringing you moving stories every day. And we would truly love to know how this story felt to you, whether you have ever lived through a moment when one small decision changed the course of your life, whether you believe in fate or in the idea that we forge our own destinies. So please share your thoughts and your feelings in the comments below. We are eager to listen to the stories that live deep inside your hearts, and thank you for staying with us until the very end of this video. May all of you who are watching have strong health, lives filled with joy, peace, and everyday happiness, and goodbye until we meet again in the next video.